While others asked, could this really be true? He simply said, if Muhammad says it, then it is the truth. In a time when lies brought power and truth brought danger, a man rose, not with weapons, but with trust. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was no ordinary companion. He was the first to believe, the first to follow, the first to give. He wasn't loud, but his truth echoed through history. Not strong in the typical sense, but firm in faith. When the Prophet returned from the night journey, mocked, ridiculed, and doubted, it was Abu Bakr who said, if he says it, then it is true. Those words earned him the name as-Siddiq, the truthful. But his story is more than a title. It is a living example of courage, loyalty, and deep love for Allah and His Messenger. This video takes you on a journey through the life of one of the greatest men of this ummah. A man whose life teaches us, truthfulness is not just a virtue. It is a foundation. It builds trust, shapes character, and anchors the heart in times of doubt. His name was Abdullah ibn Abi Quhafa, but the world would forever know him as as-Siddiq, the truthful. Born in Makkah, from noble lineage, but his true nobility was not in his ancestry. It was in the purity of his heart. Abu Bakr was quiet but resolute, a man who sought truth even before it came to him. He despised idols, never drank wine, and stayed far from the falsehood that the Quraysh celebrated daily. He was a merchant, yes, but not driven by greed. He traded honestly, with a pure heart and sincere intention. Wealth was never his goal. It was a means to help, to free, to support. When the call came, when his friend Muhammad told him, I am the messenger of Allah, he did not hesitate. He did not ask for signs. He simply said, I believe you. A sentence that changed history, because Abu Bakr didn't just see with his eyes. He saw with his heart, and his heart recognized the truth instantly. From that day forward, he stood by the Prophet, not out of duty, but out of love, not out of habit, but from conviction. He was the first free man to embrace Islam. He was the first to give, to act, to protect. He freed slaves like Bilal, spent his wealth for the cause of Allah, and migrated with tears in his eyes, not from fear, but from reverence. When the pressure from the Quraysh increased, when Muslims were persecuted, when every step in Makkah was a risk, Abu Bakr was the steady rock, gentle in manner, but unwavering in faith. And when Allah commanded the Hijrah, when the Prophet had to leave the city, it was Abu Bakr who accompanied him, not out of adventure, but from loyalty, trust, and love. In the cave of Thar, when the pursuers were close, the Prophet whispered to him, do not grieve. Indeed, Allah is with us. And those words fell not on doubt, but on the heart of a man who already understood that Allah is never far. Abu Bakr wasn't a grand orator. He wasn't a general with a loud sword, but he was the voice of truth, the mirror of the Prophet, and the conscience of the early Ummah. And the angels honored him, not for his volume, but for his clarity. Clarity in intention, clarity in love, and clarity in truthfulness. For hearts like his speak loudest in the silence of sincerity, and are heard beyond the heavens. They are the hearts that guide others, not with noise, but with unwavering light. It began with, I believe you, and led him on a path to become the most important man after the Prophet. When Abu Bakr embraced Islam, he didn't just change his life, he changed the lives of many others. Through him, people like Uthman, Abdurrahman, Ibn Auf, Talha, Az-Zubair, and others came to Islam. But his greatest role wasn't hidden. It was seen through every trial, every test of truth. When the situation in Makkah became unbearable, with persecution, mockery, and violence, it became clear the Prophet had to leave. But not alone. Abu Bakr was the one the Prophet chose, his travel companion, his confidant, his brother. In the cave of Thawr, when Quraysh reached the entrance, Abu Bakr's heart trembled, not for himself, but for the Prophet. And in that moment of fear, he whispered his trust to the heavens, for love had overcome fear, and certainty silenced every doubt. Yet the Prophet said to him, "Do not grieve. Indeed, Allah is with us." Those words became a foundation for Abu Bakr, and later for the entire Ummah. He was there when Medina welcomed the Prophet with lanterns. He was there as Islam took root. He was the first in line, the second in the cave, and the first in the Prophet's heart. But then came the day even the strongest feared. The Prophet had passed away. Abu Bakr rushed to him. He entered, leaned down, kissed the blessed forehead of the Prophet, and said, "May my father and mother be sacrificed for you. You were beautiful in life, and beautiful in death." The Ummah was shaken. Umar couldn't accept it. He stood with his sword drawn, refusing reality. But Abu Bakr, the rock of the Ummah, stepped forward. He said, "Whoever worshipped Muhammad, know that Muhammad has died. But whoever worships Allah, know that Allah is ever living and never dies." And in that moment, the Ummah found its footing again. Because the man who never lied led them to truth, even in the darkest hour. But there was a greater responsibility ahead. Who would lead now? Islam is not a faith without structure. It is a path, and every path needs a guide. The Ummah was like a ship without a captain. So the leaders of the Ansar and the Muhajirun met. Hours of discussion, hours of decision. They knew, before we bury the Prophet, we must establish leadership. It was so critical that even the most sacred ritual, the burial of the Prophet, had to wait for a moment. Because Islam teaches, leadership is protection. Leadership is unity. Leadership is duty. And so Abu Bakr stepped forward, not from ambition, but because he was the only one whom the Prophet had chosen to lead prayer. People said, how could anyone else be the Caliph when the Prophet himself appointed him as Imam? And thus he became the first Caliph of Islam, a man whose heart never strayed from the truth, whose hand never hesitated to give, whose words held the Ummah together in its hardest hour. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the first successor to the messenger, not by blood, but by truth, not through power, but through trust. A leader chosen not by lineage, but by the weight of his sincerity. He carried the Ummah not on his shoulders, but in his heart. He stood not in the shadow of the Prophet, but in his light. Abu Bakr was not a prophet. He received no revelation, performed no miracles, but he had something that has become rare today: truthfulness, in words, in actions, in decisions. And that is what made him so strong, not because he was loud, but because his inner self stood firm, even when the world around him trembled. Anyone seeking guidance today doesn't need to look far. Just measure yourself against this man. Here are 3 timeless lessons that Abu Bakr left behind for us all. Firstly, truthfulness is not just a trait, it is a foundation. When the Prophet said he had traveled to Jerusalem and ascended to the heavens in one night, the Quraysh mocked him. They ran to Abu Bakr, hoping he would doubt. But his response was clear: if he says it, then it is true. No hesitation, no doubt, no conditions. That's why he was called as-Siddiq, the one who always affirms the truth, in a world full of opinions, doubt, and ego. Be like Abu Bakr, firm upon the truth, even if you stand alone. Secondly, true leadership begins with service. As Caliph, he could have claimed wealth, but he left his house each morning to work in the market with his own hands. He carried water for elderly women, helped orphans in the night. His daughter Aisha said, his clothes were always patched, but his heart was spotless. True leadership doesn't begin on a throne, but on your knees, in service to the people. Thirdly, the Ummah needs clarity, even when it hurts. When some tribes refused to pay zakat after the Prophet passed away, Abu Bakr stood firm. Even when great companions hesitated, he said, I will fight anyone who separates prayer from zakat. He understood, if we compromise the pillars of Islam, the house will soon collapse. Leadership means making difficult decisions, not out of harshness, but out of love for truth. Abu Bakr was not a king. He wore no crown. But he had something far greater than gold, a heart that belonged to Allah, and a tongue that never lied. If you're doubting today, remember him. If you fear standing for truth, remember him. If you seek leadership, but your ego stands in the way, remember him. Because Abu Bakr as-Siddiq reminds us, true greatness is not born from power, but from sincerity. And sometimes, one clear-hearted soul is enough to hold an entire ummah together. He was the first to believe in the Prophet, the first to sacrifice everything, the first to become Caliph. Yet Abu Bakr never sought to be first. He only wished to be sincere. He loved truth more than himself. He trembled at the weight of leadership, yet stood firmer than many with louder voices. His greatness was not in words, but in actions, not in power, but in trust, not in a throne, but in nearness to Allah. He once said, if my left foot were in paradise, I would not feel safe until my right had entered as well. That was him, full of humility, fear, and hope, a man who ruled with a heart that always bowed before Allah. When we speak of him today, it's not to praise, but to learn, because in a world full of masks, truthfulness is the rarest gem. If there's one thing to take from this video, it is this: be honest with yourself. Be loyal in your faith. Be firm, even if you are alone. Because whoever lives truthfully in this dunya will not be disappointed in the akhirah. May Allah keep us steadfast and unite us with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq in paradise. Amen. Subscribe for more Islamic inspiration and share this journey with a heart that loves truth. For the path of sincerity is one walked best together, and every shared reminder brings us closer to Allah. Let your heart be a lantern for others, lighting the way through honesty and faith. He came to kill the Prophet and left the house with a new heart. His name was Umar ibn al-Khattab. When tyrants saw him, they trembled. When he wept, hearts quaked. When he spoke, justice was redefined. Umar ibn al-Khattab was like a mountain, but his heart was soft for Allah. He was what many fear to become: consistent, truthful, fearless, and just. He was the second Caliph of Islam, a man who walked the night to help the needy and wielded the sword of justice by day. His life changed the destiny of the Ummah. His decisions shaped generations. His tears and his strength, both signs of deep God consciousness. This video tells the story of Umar ibn al-Khattab, the man even Shaitan avoided, whose footsteps remain forever in the heart of this ummah, a leader whose justice shaped nations, and whose humility softened the weight of power. Before he found the light, he stood in the dark, not as a weak man, but as an adversary. Umar ibn al-Khattab was known for his strength, his resolve, and his uncompromising stance. He was a man of principle, but in the beginning, those principles stood against Islam. He saw this new message as a threat to the order, to the honor of Quraysh, and to the traditions of his ancestors. So much so that one day he set out, sword in hand, to kill the Prophet. But Allah had written a different path. On the way, he heard something shocking. His own sister had embraced Islam. Rage filled him. He stormed into her house and struck her, until he saw the blood on her face and heard the calm in her words. "We believe in Allah." She did not waver. He asked to read what she had been reciting. And in those verses, something inside him broke, not in anger, but in awakening.
أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى إلا تذكرة لمن يخشى تنزيلا ممن خلق الأرض والسماوات العلى الرحمن على العرش استوى.
Taha, we have not sent down the Quran to you to cause you distress, but only as a reminder for those who fear Allah. A revelation from the one who created the earth and the high heavens. The Most Merciful is established above the throne. And as he read those few verses of the Surah Taha, his heart began to tremble. This was no ordinary text. It was revelation. And suddenly, everything fell. His pride, his anger, his doubts. He went to the house of the Prophet, no longer as an enemy, but as a seeker. And there, in a room filled with astonished companions, he said with unwavering voice, "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger." It wasn't just a moment. It was a turning point for the entire ummah. Because with Umar's Islam, a new phase of strength had begun. He came out in the open, let the Muslims pray together at the Kaaba, and shook Quraysh with his mere presence. From that day forward, he was no longer a pursuer. He became a protector of Islam, and Allah honored him by spreading justice on earth through his hands. Through his courage, the weak stood tall, and truth walked openly in the streets of Makkah. It wasn't just a conversion, it was a revolution, deep within his soul. Umar ibn al-Khattab was strong, fearless, and unshakable. And yet, he was walking the wrong path. His strength served the arrogance of Quraysh. His fury targeted Islam. Until that day, when he set out, sword drawn, to silence the Prophet forever. But Allah guides hearts, however He wills. On his way, he learned that his own sister had accepted Islam. Blinded by anger, he stormed into her home. There, he heard and read the noble verses of Surah Taha. These verses spoke directly to his soul. In that moment, the walls inside him began to crack. The rock began to melt. His hardness gave way to light. Umar no longer raised his sword against Islam. He stood tall for it, in the very first row of believers. He wasn't just a new Muslim. He became a walking sign that no heart is ever too far for Allah's mercy. His acceptance wasn't a whisper. It was a tremor through Makkah. He said, "O Messenger of Allah, are we not upon the truth? Why then do we hide?" So they marched, side by side with Umar, to the Kaaba. Two lines of believers, Umar in one, Hamza in the other. A display of strength Quraysh had never seen. From that day forward, No one feared to proclaim Islam, because Umar had become the visible shield of the Ummah. But his true test didn't begin in Makkah. It began in Medina. There, where Islam grew, where society, politics, and justice were shaped. Umar was a man of principles. His heart burned for truth. He was firm, but not harsh. Strong, but fair. He stood for the poor, defended the weak, and never bowed to injustice, even when it came from the powerful. When he spoke, noise fell silent. When he stood, the proud stepped back. The Prophet saw in him more than a companion. He once said, "If there were to be a prophet after me, it would be Umar ibn al-Khattab." And when the Prophet passed away, it was Umar who trembled. He unsheathed his sword and cried in despair, "Whoever says Muhammad has died, I will strike him." But then, Abu Bakr stood before the people and spoke the words that realigned the Ummah. Umar lowered his sword, and his tears testified to his love. He realized, this Deen demands clarity, even when it hurts. Umar ibn al-Khattab was a student, but also a leader. He observed, he learned, and he grew in a time when Islam was shaping history every day. He became an advisor, a confidant, and the shadow of the Prophet. And even though he was mighty, he remained humble before the Quran, in awe of Allah, and filled with love for the Messenger. Because Islam hadn't just changed him, it had renewed him. And soon, this man who once fought against Islam would raise its banner across the world. After 2 years and 3 months of Khilafah, in which Abu Bakr guided the Ummah with gentleness, wisdom, and unwavering truth, his soul returned to his Lord. Yet even in death, he thought of the Ummah. He left behind a name, a man he trusted to lead with strength, clarity, and justice. That man was Umar ibn al-Khattab. Without hesitation, the Ummah accepted this choice. And so, after Abu Bakr's death, Umar became the second Caliph of Islam. He did not take this role out of ambition, but out of duty, fear of Allah, and love for truth. For the next 10 years, a decade filled with decisive reforms, expansion, inner growth, and deep justice, Umar would steer the ship of the Ummah, a decade in which Islam spread across continents. But Umar carried that weight, not with pride, but with tears in his eyes and one question in his heart. Am I truly worthy of this responsibility? He walked among his people, listening more than he spoke, judging less than he wept. And in every moment of leadership, he saw not power, but a heavy trust placed in his trembling hands. If the world seeks to define justice, then it must speak the name of Umar. If people ask, how can power coexist with humility, leadership with God consciousness, and strength with tears? The answer is, look at Umar, because he wasn't a statue carved of stone. He was heart and mind, firm in truth, but soft within. A caliph who walked the streets at night, not to be praised, but to find the hungry, support the weak, and listen to the lonely souls. He ruled the largest empire of his time, yet trembled at the thought of standing before Allah. So what can we learn from him? Here are 3 timeless lessons from Umar ibn al-Khattab. Firstly, justice begins with yourself. Umar was known for his standard. A right is a right, even against yourself. He once said, "Fear Allah. Whoever commits injustice will bear its burden on the day of judgment, even if he is an emir." As caliph, his clothes were patched. He rejected luxury, and when he once used a government camel, he stood publicly and asked, "Does this belong to me or to the Ummah?" True justice doesn't start in the courtroom. It starts in your own heart. It shows in the questions you ask when no one demands answers. Secondly, the fear of Allah is true strength. He was a man whom the shayateen avoided, but in prayer, he wept like a child. He said, "If everyone were to enter paradise except one, I would fear that I am that one." That was Umar, a rock among men, but a humble servant before Allah. In an age where pride is normalized, Umar teaches us, real greatness lies in humility, not in being feared, but in fearing Allah. Thirdly, leadership is service, not a crown. Umar ruled a vast empire, but if you saw him, you wouldn't think he was a king. He carried sacks for widows, cooked for orphans, and listened to complaints deep into the night. One day, a man traveled from afar to meet him, only to find him sleeping beneath a tree, alone, without guards. And he said, "You rule with justice, so you sleep in peace." In a world obsessed with power and ego, Umar teaches us, those who serve are those who truly lead. Umar ibn al-Khattab was not a marble saint. He was human, with anger, strength, and flaws, but Islam shaped him. Love for the Prophet transformed him, and the fear of Allah softened him. If you think you're too harsh, too far, too unworthy, remember Umar. If you think strength means being hard, remember Umar. And if you seek leadership in a world lost in confusion, remember Umar, because Umar ibn al-Khattab reminds us, justice is a light, courage is a prayer, and power is a burden, carried only by hearts that fear Allah. He was the gate of the Ummah. As long as he lived, none dared to break through. With Umar's death, a new era began, but his footprints remained, not in gold, but in tears, not on thrones, but in the hearts of the weak he protected. He feared Allah more than his enemies feared him. He walked through life with a firm step, yet inside, his soul was always kneeling. He once said, "If I were a sheep and someone were to slaughter me, I would still fear that Allah might ask me, 'Why?'" Such was the depth of his accountability. Such was the honesty of his heart. And such was the light he left behind in the darkness. He was not perfect, but he was sincere. Not flawless, but deeply afraid of his flaws. If today you see a world where justice is silent, remember Umar, who gave justice a voice. If you feel weak, remember Umar, who turned his weakness into fear of Allah. And if you seek to understand what it means to bear responsibility, then read about him, listen to him, and know true strength begins with surrender to your Lord. And walk a few steps in his path. May Allah grant us justice in our hearts, humility in our success, and strength in the truth. And may He unite us with Umar ibn al-Khattab in paradise. Ameen. He was the man who married 2 daughters of the Prophet, a caliph so gentle, even the angels felt shy before him. When you think of strength, you might think of courage. When you speak of leadership, you might think of power. But true greatness often appears in silence, in patience, in generosity, in endurance. Uthman ibn Affan was not loud. He rarely raised his voice. But when he acted, the world trembled. He purchased the well of Rumi and made it free for all Muslims. He financed entire armies, yet wore the simplest clothes. He was wealthy, but kept nothing back from Allah. And when he became caliph, he led with mercy, with justice, with a patience that remained unshaken even in the face of fitna. But his greatest act was invisible to many. the preservation of the Quran. Because of him, the book we hold in our hands today was safeguarded in a single, unified recitation. This video tells the story of Uthman ibn Affan, the Caliph whose tears were purer than gold and whose martyrdom became the final line of a golden era. A man whose legacy still flows through every Quran we recite. Uthman ibn Affan was born into a noble family. From the powerful Umayyad clan of Quraysh, he possessed great wealth, but his heart remained pure. Even in his youth, he was known for his modesty, his honesty, and his kindness toward the poor. People trusted him, not for his lineage, but for his character. When he heard about Islam, he did not hesitate. He did not demand proof, nor a miracle. For him, the light of truth was enough. He was among the earliest believers, those whose hearts opened through the Prophet's words. And he remained loyal until his final breath. The Prophet loved him deeply, so much so that he gave him one of his daughters in marriage, and after her passing, gave him another. Thus, Uthman became known by the honored title Dun Nurain, the possessor of two lights. He was quiet, but his impact was immense. He emigrated to Abyssinia, among the first to do so. He left behind his business, his status, his comfort, only to follow the path of Allah. In Medina, he was not just a companion, he was a pillar of the community, a man who did not speak much, but gave abundantly. When Muslims needed water, he brought it. When they sought protection, he stood up. And when they needed comfort, he was there. Many saw him only as the wealthy merchant, but the Prophet saw more. He saw a bearer of hearts, one willing to give for Allah's sake until nothing remained. And it was for this reason that he would one day inherit the most difficult of legacies, the Caliphate, at a time of internal storms. With the death of Umar ibn al-Khattab, an era came to an end, an era marked by clarity, strength, and uncompromising justice. The Ummah had grown, in faith, in knowledge, and across vast lands. But with growth came new challenges. Different cultures, languages, and customs began entering the heart of the Muslim world. The unity, once firm, faced a new test. The Sahaba understood. The Ummah needed a caliph who was not only pious, but also able to carry the heavy legacy of Umar. The Ummah made one condition clear. The next caliph must agree to lead the Ummah with the legal reasoning and methodology of Umar, with his principles, his judgment, his clarity. Two men were considered. Ali ibn Abi Talib, a man of deep knowledge, courage, and wisdom, and Uthman ibn Affan, the gentle one, the generous giver, the man with two lights. Both were asked. Ali hesitated, not because he didn't believe in justice, but because, as a jurist, he wanted the freedom to apply new judgments to new issues. But Uthman, whose heart was filled with humility, agreed. He promised to uphold the example of Umar and lead the Ummah in unity and righteousness. And so, by unanimous decision, Uthman became the third Caliph of Islam. Uthman assumed the role at around 70 years old. His beard had turned white, but his sincerity remained young. He did not rule with an iron fist, but with patience, not with harsh decrees, but with the softness of a man whose gaze never left the hereafter. During his leadership, the Islamic Empire expanded to North Africa, Central Asia, and even parts of Europe. But amid the expansion, Uthman accomplished something far greater. He preserved the heart of the Ummah, the Quran. As Muslims in far regions began reciting the Quran differently, confusion spread. Disputes emerged. My recitation is right. Yours is wrong. Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman, returning from military campaigns, warned, O Caliph, save this ummah before they begin to argue about the Quran like the nations before us did. And Uthman listened, as he always did, with his heart. He appointed Zayd ibn Thabit and a team of Quran scholars to produce a standardized manuscript based on the copy compiled earlier under Abu Bakr. They wrote it down in a form all could accept. This copy, known as the Mushaf of Uthman, was sent to the major cities of the empire: Kufa, Basra, Damascus, Makkah, and others. All other variations were destroyed, not out of pride, but to preserve unity and protect the purity of Allah's word. To this day, over 1400 years later, Muslims around the world read from this very Mushaf. But with greatness comes burden, and with responsibility, envy. Some began to question his decisions. They mistook his gentleness for weakness. They spread whispers, stirred unrest, and planted doubt among those whose faith was still shallow. Yet Uthman remained firm. He refused to use violence against Muslims, even those who rose up against him. He said, I do not wish for a single drop of blood to be shed because of me. That was his strength, patience, where others might have responded with force. Eventually, a rebellious group besieged his home. His family urged him to defend himself, to strike back. But Uthman knew this trial wasn't about his honor. It was about the unity of the Ummah. And so, one morning, he sat with the Quran in his lap, reciting the words he had helped preserve, when the assassin's sword struck him. His blood spilled across the pages of the Quran, on the verse from Surah Al-Baqarah. So, Allah will suffice you against them, and He is the all-hearing, the all-knowing. A martyr, a guardian, a man who died in gentleness, but whose name remains among the greatest. A martyr, whose final breath rose with the recitation of the book he preserved. A guardian, who protected the words of Allah until they were the last thing he saw. A man who died in gentleness, surrounded not by soldiers, but by Scripture. If the Ummah today seeks role models, then Uthman ibn Affan is one of the brightest names we can speak. A man who was wealthy, but never ruled by wealth. A leader who could have dominated, but chose to serve. A caliph who spoke softly, but acted with firm resolve. So what can we learn from him today? Here are 3 timeless lessons. Firstly, gentleness is not weakness. In a world where volume is mistaken for strength, Uthman shows us that true power can lie in silence. He spoke with tenderness, but his decisions carried the weight of generations. The Prophet said of him, "If I had a 3rd daughter, I would marry her to him." Such was his rank, earned through character, not coercion. He remained calm in crises. He was silent where others would shout. And because of that, his voice is still heard across centuries. Secondly, the Quran is our anchor. During his caliphate, the Islamic world expanded rapidly. But Uthman knew, if the Quran is not preserved in unity, the Ummah would lose its foundation. He could have fought political chaos. Instead, he safeguarded the eternal, the Book of Allah. Today, in every Muslim household, in every mosque, in every heart that recites the Quran, a piece of Uthman's legacy lives on. His vision extended beyond borders. It was a gift for the Ummah until the Day of Judgment. Thirdly, sacrifice, even in the highest office. He was a caliph, but his heart was that of a servant. Before he ever became leader, he gave generously for the sake of Allah. He financed the army during the hardship campaign, He purchased the famous well of Rumi and made it public. He gave without measure because he relied on Allah's reward. And even in death, he refused to be the cause of Muslim bloodshed. His martyrdom was his final act of service, not for himself, but for the unity of the Ummah. Uthman ibn Affan was not a man of grand speeches. He was a man of quiet actions, whose legacy spoke louder than words. If you feel weak today, but sense there's more within you, think of him. If you witness injustice, but fear to raise your voice, think of him. If you believe gentleness has no place left in this world, think of him. Because Uthman taught us, not every hero needs to be loud. Some save the Ummah, with a tear, a verse, a quiet sacrifice. Some men change the world through speeches, others through the sound of their silence. Uthman ibn Affan was one of them, quiet but resolute, soft-spoken but unwavering. He was the third of the rightly guided Caliphs, yet in humility, he was often the first. When the world grew noisy, he remained still. When enemies surrounded him, he refused to raise the sword against Muslims. When the fitna erupted, he sacrificed himself for the unity of the Ummah. He once said, "By Allah, if they kill me, they will never find someone like me after me." And he was right. With his martyrdom, the Ummah didn't just lose a caliph, it lost its quiet backbone. Yet his traces remain, not in palaces, not in monuments, but in every Quran we recite, in every drop of water flowing from a public well, in every act of hidden charity, done purely for the sake of Allah. If today you seek the strength to act silently, remember Uthman. If you doubt whether gentleness still holds value, remember Uthman. And if you ask how one can serve Islam, even when the world turns against you, then read about him, learn from him, and take strength from his steadfastness. May Allah grant us patience like his, purity like his, and hearts that remain unshaken like his. And may he unite us with Uthman ibn Affan in paradise, a place with no discord, no division, and no pain. Ameen. He slept in the Prophet's bed, ready to die so that Islam might live. Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Lion of Allah. There are men who change the course of battles, others who reshape the power of words. But then there are those who carry the heart of truth itself. Ali ibn Abi Talib was no ordinary man. He grew up in the house of the Prophet. He was the first boy to embrace Islam, a student of the Quran, long before the Quran was fully revealed. His childhood was light. His faith was pure. His loyalty unshakable. He stood so close to the Prophet that their souls knew each other, and he fought for Islam, not for fame, but for the face of Allah. His knowledge was like a deep well, his courage like a mountain. He was the man whom even Umar would seek counsel from. But despite all his strength, he loved prayer more than victory. This video tells the story of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the boy who believed first, and the caliph who fell last. Ali ibn Abi Talib grew up in the house of the Prophet. His cousin, yes, but more than that, his student, his guardian child, his confidant. He was only 10 years old when he embraced Islam. No hesitation, no negotiations, only certainty. For Ali, Islam was not a new idea. It was a return to a truth his heart already recognized. He was the first to stand with the Prophet when few dared. and he was ready to die for him. Like on the night of the Hijrah, when he slept in the Prophet's bed to protect him from Quraysh assassins. On the battlefield, he was fearless. At Khaybar, it was his hand that tore open the fortress gates. But even greater than his strength was his character, humble, God-fearing, sincere. The Prophet honored him by marrying him to his daughter Fatima. And when the Prophet passed away, Ali stepped back, not because he had nothing to say, but because he carried a grief only a true lover could understand. He chose silence over argument, loyalty over ambition, and unity over position. Ali ibn Abi Talib became Caliph when the Ummah was more fractured than ever before. After the tragic martyrdom of Uthman ibn Affan, the burden of leadership fell upon a man who had never sought power, but who now had to lead with wisdom. Before Uthman's assassination, the voices of the Ummah cried out for clarity. They demanded a caliph who would govern using the legal methodology of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Both Ali and Uthman had been asked to accept this condition, but only Uthman had agreed. Ali hesitated, not out of pride, but because as a scholar he wished to retain the freedom to derive rulings independently when new issues arose. But after Uthman's assassination, everything changed. People came to him in waves, hopeful, desperate. They pleaded, "Only you can hold the Ummah together." And so, Ali accepted the caliphate, not out of ambition, but out of responsibility. Yet from the very beginning, his leadership was tested. The killers of Uthman still walked free, and Ali, newly appointed, stood before a dilemma. How could he establish justice without tearing the fragile Ummah apart? Many prominent companions, Talha, Az-Zubair, and Aisha, demanded swift retaliation. But Ali saw deeper. He knew, if he sought vengeance amidst chaos, the unity of the Ummah would shatter completely. He tried to mediate, but emotions ran high, and thus came the Battle of Al-Jamal, a confrontation between two sincere groups of believers, each desiring good for the Ummah, yet differing in the path. After the battle, Ali wept, not for victory, but for those who had died, his brothers and his sisters. He said, "I wish I had died before this affair ever occurred." Then came the second great trial. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, governor of Syria and relative of Uthman, refused to pledge allegiance to Ali unless the murderers were brought to justice. This led to the Battle of Shiffin, and again, Ali's foresight shone through. As the bloodshed escalated, he accepted a proposal for arbitration, even though many in his own ranks opposed it. And it was this decision that turned some against him. A radical faction, later known as the Khawarij, broke away. They declared him an apostate simply because he chose peace over war. Ali was surrounded by division and doubt, but he remained steadfast. He ruled with justice, spoke the truth, even when it hurt. He reduced his own stipend to ease the burden on the treasury. He lived simply, judged with depth, and governed with sincerity. In his final days, he said, "I did not come to rule you, I came to remind you." And then, on his way to the Fajr prayer, he was struck by the sword of a Kharijite assassin. In his blood, there was no anger, only the whisper, "Success is in the hereafter." Thus ended the caliphate of a man who never sought leadership, but bore it with the humility of a servant. Some people speak with force, others with wisdom, but a rare few speak with both. Ali ibn Abi Talib was the living embodiment of balance, strength and gentleness, leadership and humility, justice and compassion. If you want to know how to live by truth, even when it becomes dangerous, look at him. Here are 3 timeless lessons we can take from his life. Firstly, knowledge is light, but only with taqwa. Ali was an ocean of knowledge. The Prophet said, "I am the city of knowledge, and Ali is its gate." But what truly made Ali special wasn't just what he knew. It was how deeply he feared Allah. He didn't just recite wisdom. He lived it. He debated with the Quran and Sunnah as his compass, even in the midst of political tension and war. His knowledge didn't make him arrogant. It made him humble. In a world full of voices, he teaches us, don't just seek knowledge, seek light. Secondly, courage means standing for truth, even against your own. Ali was no politician. He was a servant of truth. As Caliph, he made decisions that puzzled even his closest supporters. He put justice above tribal loyalty. He distributed wealth fairly, not based on lineage or status. And it made him vulnerable. But he never backed down. He said, "Truth is not known by people. Know the truth, and you will recognize the people." In an age where loyalty often trumps principle, Ali reminds us, real courage begins when you defend what's right, even if you stand alone. And true leadership is not about pleasing the crowd, but about standing firm on the truth. Thirdly, true greatness lies in the purity of the heart. He was the lion of Allah, but he was gentle with the needy. He was a warrior, but he trembled in prayer before Allah. He was a caliph, but never boasted of his rank. Ali reminds us, the heart is the real battlefield, and the one who conquers it wins the greatest of all victories. Ali ibn Abi Talib was not just a man of the sword. He was a man of knowledge, not just a caliph, but a servant of truth. In him, strength met tenderness, clarity met patience, courage met humility. He did not seek fame. He did not rule to dominate. He was present when others stayed silent. And he stayed silent when others argued. If you seek a role model who does not mistake loudness for justice, think of Ali. If your principles make you feel alone, think of Ali. And if you want not only to defend Islam, but to embody it, then read about him, learn from him, and walk a little in his footsteps, because his legacy lives on, not in palaces, but in hearts that remain firm even when the world shakes. It echoes in every act of justice, in every silent prayer whispered with sincerity, and in every soul that chooses truth over comfort. Some men fight with swords, others with words, but Ali ibn Abi Talib fought with the heart. He was the fourth of the rightly guided caliphs, but in knowledge, courage, and love for the Prophet, he was among the first. His words echoed like pure wisdom. His patience carried the weight of division and pain. And his faith remained unshaken, even when the Ummah wavered. He once said, "Truth is not known by people. Know the truth, and you will recognize those who are true." A man who never fought for himself, but only for what was right. A leader who never sought the caliphate, but carried it like a burden made of light. If you yearn for clarity, think of Ali. If you're wounded by injustice, think of Ali. And if you wonder whether gentleness and strength can live in one heart, then read about him, listen to him, and learn from him. May Allah grant us wisdom like his, patience like his, and hearts that follow the truth like he did. And may he unite us with Ali ibn Abi Talib in paradise, near the one he loved most, the Prophet Muhammad. Ameen.